Everything is big in Texas. Most of us have heard that phrase before, except it doesn't apply to Don Bierschwale's little team out of San Antonio. Yes, that Don Bierschwale, dad to Eddie Bierschwale. Yes, that Eddie Bierschwale, and that Eddie Bierschwale, and that Eddie Bierschwale. A mortician by trade, Don Bierschwale was also a big race fan. He had interests in various racetracks in the area and started a cup team in 1971 with local legend Jimmy Finger driving. After 2 uneventful starts in 1972, Finger couldn't compete at Talladega, so Don asked another local driver, Clarence Lovell, who answered with, "Sure, I'd love to try Cup sometime." Don returned with, "I mean next Sunday." Having raced on nothing bigger than a half mile, Slim, as he was known in them there parts, was about to turn left at the biggest, baddest circuit NASCAR had to offer. Now Bierschwale wanted the quiet Texan to pilot his number 61 Ford on the Alabama high banks. Well, the first thing he did upon arriving was asking the advice of NASCAR's head tech guy, Bill Gazaway, who promptly suggested talking to Buddy Baker and Fred Lorenzen. Gazaway loaned them his station wagon, and the 2 stars took Lovell around the 2.66-mile oval, pointing out grooves and the safest way around the asphalt ribbon. Getting that nickname from his high school basketball days, the then 25-year-old had made a name for himself around San Antonio, running hobby stocks and late models, and was a household name at Pan Am Speedway, among other places. The Big Little Texas team qualified at 178 miles an hour, good enough for 21st, and when the checkered flag fell, Lovell was still on the track, completing 121 of 188 laps, and ended up 31st. Okay, so why not try it again? Except at the longest race on the circuit, the World 600, where they overheated. Okay, how about Dover? That wasn't as kind, as the Bachelor crashed after only 2 laps. But Texas was coming up in a couple of weeks, and the team stuck with Clarence, and they placed 19th. Bierschwale's team, sponsored by his funeral home and Don's ambulance service, ran most of the rest of the season, placing their driver 32nd in points, with a best finish of 12th late in the year at Rockingham. Probably the brightest spot of 1972 was an ARCA race at Texas World, where Slim placed 6th after qualifying 2nd. He was not on the lead lap, but was now turning heads. "He was like a brother to me," said Eddie recently of the speed shop owner. "Of course, I was only a teenager back then, but what a hard worker he was. Dad Don must have agreed as they went to Daytona in 1973, but now with a brand new Chevy Malibu. They didn't make the 500, placing 24th in their qualifier. Then they crashed at Rockingham. But then they placed 9th at Atlanta, and at Texas World in a USAC stock car race, Clarence finished 5th, only 1 lap down, and now this little Texas team's confidence was soaring, and for good reason. "I'm on my way now," stated Clarence happily. "My car has never run better. Qualifying 12th at Talladega, his 1-year anniversary behind the wheel, even the big guy must have had big worries, what with 60 cars starting. Many voiced their concerns, and sure enough, on lap 5, a massive 23-car pileup wiped out almost half the field. But not this team, co-owned by Jim Burke. Slim had placed 4th, only 3 laps down, to dominant superstar winner David Pearson. He'd missed the big one and took the checkered flag. This is my second finish in the top 10, and I'm really looking forward to the World 600 in Charlotte. Even though it has since been reconfigured, the curve under the Katy Railroad overpass had always been tricky. driving eastbound on the 410 loop just west of Interstate 35, Clarence Alvin Lovell crashed into one of the concrete pillars at 4:35 a.m. Friday morning, May 11th, 1973, after visiting friends. He was not speeding. His pickup's speedometer stuck at 48 miles per hour, well below the legal speed limit in that area, and there were no skid marks. Though authorities were baffled at the cause, they surmised that he was perhaps reaching for a tape among the many that were strewn on the floor of his truck and lost control. He left this world at the young age of 26. Any race fan knows that the entire motorsports world keeps an eye on the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The month of May is for the Indy 500. One day later, in practice for the Indy 500, the glamour grandpa, Art Pollard, was killed in a spectacular and violent wreck shown worldwide on television, garnering more attention than the little big Texan from San Antonio. Certainly not the way drivers want to gather attention, either by accident or death, obviously. But in this case, the IndyCar star Pollard was going to gather more headlines than little Clarence Lovell from San Antonio, Texas. So while the racing world mourned the driver who had just lost his life at Indianapolis, Clarence Lovell's body lay in state at Oak Hills Mortuary Chapel on Sunday, May 13th, and Tuesday services took place at the Roselawn Memorial Park. He was survived by his mother, Helen Lovell, his sister, Margie Payne, and Nancy Pepper, his brothers, Charles, Robert, and Jerry, his grandfather, Christian Anderson, and his fiancée, Irene Oyala. But there were still many who would not forget Slim. We just ate and slept racing. He loved it, said Mrs. Sandra Ofinger, an employee of Don's ambulance service at the time. And even Eddie stated recently, he was a blast. He hardly said a word, but he was so much fun. We were like brothers. He was like a brother to me. When I asked him if he thought maybe it took the wind out of his dad, Don's sails, he said, "Oh, absolutely. We didn't stop racing, but you could tell things were different from then on." The big little team out of Texas decided to keep going and settled on Ed Strecht, the very first winner of the Texas Race of Champions at the Texas World Speedway in 1976, behind the wheel. Clarence and I were the best of friends, and his death really hit me hard, said Strecht. Clarence and I ran against each other in sportsman races. We teamed in road races at Monterey, and his parents lived right behind me. I've wanted a Grand National ride for a long time, and this was a bad way to get it, but it's the way Clarence would have wanted it. He worked hard to build this little racing team. He wouldn't want all of his efforts to go down the drain. So all of us who were close to him have stepped together to keep it going. That's the way Clarence was doing it, and that's what he would want me to do. Strecht's first race behind the wheel was supposed to be Charlotte in the World 600, but it ended up being a 20th at Texas, and he followed that up with 34th, 28th, and 33rd at Talladega. Perhaps the team was still mourning, considering those results, and they decided to put Dick Brooks behind the wheel of the car at Darlington. Yes, that Dick Brooks, who won the Talladega 500 in August of that same year. But Johnny Rutherford, yes, that Johnny Rutherford, the Indy 500 winning Johnny Rutherford, the following year, took the car to 13th at Rockingham. So not a bad result for a little team out of the great state of Texas. Johnny Rutherford was back behind the wheel in 1974 at both Daytona races, and for the Firecracker 400, crashed the number 61 Chevelle, marking the last time he would race for Don Bierschwell. However, the team kept going, though sporadically, with Jimmy Finger making a couple of one-offs, and even A.J. Foyt qualifying for the 1992 Daytona 500, driving for Don. But it was mostly Eddie who took over the reins, starting in the early 1980s and into the late 1990s, even taking the win in the 1992 ARCA race at Texas World Speedway, marking the only time Don would visit Victory Lane as a car owner. Don Bierschwell eventually passed away in 2011, but the funeral home is still going strong, with numerous family members helping to run it. Eddie is still involved, but right now, he said, he's selling solar panels and making a good living at it. As for Lovell, not many people remember him anymore, but at the time Bob Myers summed up his death, probably in the best way. Lovell's story literally drips with irony, he said. It's reasonable to expect race drivers to die at work, and when they don't, somehow the tragedy carries a greater impact, especially for one whose best lies in front of him.